Hello, welcome to this Introduction to Ruby on Rails tutorial. My name is Patrick McSweeney. I have my Twitter handle up there. This is a screencast version of the presentation that I gave at the Columbus Ruby Brigade meeting in May of 2014. I had a few people mention to me that they would like to be able to access the materials online, so I figured this would be the best way to do it. So Ruby on Rails has been around for about 10 years, but it's been getting a lot of attention lately. It's especially popular among the startup community, and it's probably used to power some of the websites that you like to visit. So I'm just going to start off with a brief description of Ruby on Rails so you have some idea of what I'm talking about in this tutorial. Ruby on Rails is a full-stack web application framework, and what this means is that it can handle everything from working with the database or a web service to showing HTML to the user and everything in between. It is a Ruby gem. A Ruby gem is basically a package that you can download and install and run using the Ruby programming language. And in this case, Rails is a gem, which is actually made up of several other gems. Ruby on Rails implements the model view controller pattern, and this is a pattern that is really popular among different application frameworks, both for the web and in general. And basically, the model view controller is really fundamental to how Rails operates. Rails is completely open source, so what this means is that you can go on GitHub and download the source code and look at it and tinker with it and possibly make a contribution. And one of the reasons that Rails has been able to grow so much is because there's so many people out there who make their own contributions in their own ways. And Rails can be enhanced with other gems that you can download and install and run along with Rails. And this is a big part of the reason that Ruby on Rails is so popular, is because of the community aspect of it. A lot of the best gems out there just started out as a developer who created a gem to solve whatever specific need they had, and then they decided to share it with the rest of the community. And as a result, when you're creating a Rails application, there are all kinds of gems that you can download and install to add some cool functionality to your application. And another reason that Ruby on Rails is so popular is because it's both beginner friendly and has a lot of advanced features. So even if somebody is not an experienced programmer, they can get up and running and build applications using Ruby on Rails without a whole lot of difficulty. And this makes it accessible to a lot of people who would normally be intimidated by, writing a bunch of big SQL queries and doing a bunch of low-level programming in something like Java. But also, Rails has a lot of advanced features that attract the more experienced developers as well, and a lot of stuff you can do in terms of functionality and scaling and so on. So, like I said, Ruby on Rails, you can enhance the functionality really easily by just downloading and installing gems, but there's a lot that you can do with Rails just out of the box without having to add anything to it. It can handle database abstraction, and this is a really cool feature of Ruby on Rails. It saves you from having to write a lot of the more mundane SQL queries that you would have to write on a day-to-day basis. And this is one of the things that makes it accessible to beginners, and also just makes it more fun for developers in general. Because even if you know how to write all of the SQL queries, most people probably don't enjoy doing that all the time. Rails can handle routing, and this makes it really easy to manage all of the URLs for your application and keep things consistent and not have it become a big tangled mess. Rails does a really good job with building and processing forms, and if you've ever tried to do this manually, you know that this is probably pretty tedious, but with Ruby on Rails, it's really a snap, and this is one of the things that makes it a lot more fun, a lot of fun to develop with. It can handle templating, and this basically just means that it can show your dynamic content to the user inside of HTML templates that you define, and this works really well right out of the box. It can handle AJAX requests, and basically this just means it Ajax refers to the practice of refreshing just part of a web page rather than doing an entire page reload whenever the user interacts with something. And Rails does a pretty good job of handling this straight out of the box. You can handle sending email. And of course, since it's written in the Ruby programming language, it also comes with all the cool object-oriented features of Ruby. So since I'm trying to keep things pretty short here, I don't really have time to do a complete step-by-step tutorial on how to get up and running with Ruby on Rails. So I'm just going to go over a few things that you need to understand in order to get up and running. So the first thing you need to do is make sure the Ruby programming language is installed on your computer, and then install the Rails gem. So there's probably some other software you have to install in order to get to this point, but there's a lot of good tutorials online on how to do this, and also you can just ask somebody who has experience doing this to help walk you through it the first time you need to do it yourself. Once you have Rails installed, if you just use the Rails new command followed by the name of your project, this will automatically generate all the files in the folder structure you need to get an application running, and this is a really useful tool. And once you have your Rails project generated, you'll need to run the bundle command, and this will install all the gems that come along with Rails for you. And this is also the command that you will run every time that you install a new gem, and basically it just makes sure that all of your gems play nicely with one another. And one thing that you're going to need to understand and get used to with working with Ruby on Rails is, instead of making changes to the database directly, either using the command line or php myadmin, you're supposed to use what's called a migration file. And basically this just means that you'll type in a simple list of commands of the changes to the database that you need to make, and then save the file, and then run the rakedb migrate command to update the database. And this might seem kind of weird at first, but once I think you'll see the usefulness of it, and I'm going to cover more of that later on in the talk. Also, Rails comes with a tool called generators, and what these do basically is helps you create the files that you need to run your application. And I do recommend that you use these, but it's still important to understand what conventions are being used with the Rails generators and to have some idea of what's going on under the hood. So if you are using them, try not to just blindly rely on them. Otherwise, you won't have as full of understanding of Rails as you need to. Also, Rails comes prepackaged with the front-end preprocessors CoffeeScript and Sass. CoffeeScript is for JavaScript and Sass is for CSS respectively. And you can use these if you like, but you don't need to. If you want to use plain old JavaScript and CSS, you can. So that's up to you on how you want to attack that. Rails uses the model view controller pattern, and this is really fundamental to how Rails operates, and you need to have a good understanding of this in order to be able to use Rails effectively. And you might notice that I put the view part in parentheses, and this is because it's becoming increasingly popular to use Rails or a framework like it to basically serve as the backend for a front end that is written in JavaScript using Ember. So if you're writing your entire front end in JavaScript, you're really not using the view part of Ruby on Rails. So I put that in parentheses to indicate that that's optional, although it is useful if you want to use it. So this is a very common pattern across many different frameworks and programming languages. If you've used the MVC pattern in a different framework, even if it's in a completely different language, a lot of the things that you see when you're working with Ruby on Rails will look pretty familiar to you, and it'll help you give you a pretty good head start. The MVC pattern was originally created as a way of separating application logic from the presentation side of the application. So when you're working with the web, this basically means keeping the database stuff away from your HTML so they don't interfere with each other. And if you use the model view controller pattern properly, it makes it a lot easier to keep things organized in your application. So when you or another developer needs to go back and find something, it'll be really easy to find. And So generally speaking, when you're using the model view controller pattern, each resource type or each resource or information type will have 3 components. And again, this is just in general. This is not a hard and fast rule that you need to follow. So each resource is going to have a model class, and this will interact with the database and handle most of the heavy lifting as far as the logic for your application goes. There will also be a folder full of view files, and this will display the HTML to the user with your dynamic content mixed in. And there will also be a controller class, and this basically just passes information back and forth between the model and the view. And the controller class should really just be the glue of the application. There's really not a whole lot going on there. And a few other things to note about the model view controller pattern. The model and the controller classes inherit their functionality from their parent classes, and this is where a lot of the power of using the MVC in Rails comes in, because you can call all of the methods that have been already defined for you inside of your model and your controller classes. And if you define a model class inside of your application, Rails is going to expect that there's a corresponding table in the database. And so if you have a model class without a database table corresponding to it, things won't work properly. So that's an important thing to remember. And also, even though I said that each resource will have its own model, controller, and view, these files are not grouped together by what resource type they are. They're grouped together by what file type they are. So this means that all the model files are together, all the controller files are together, and so on. So now I'm going to go over some stuff with some of the basics of Rails Active Record. And the Active Record pattern is something that is not unique to Ruby on Rails, but it is Rails is probably the best known example of it. And this is a big part of the reason that Ruby on Rails is becoming so popular. So when inside of Ruby on Rails, each model class inherits a lot of its functionality from the Active Record class. And what this means is that each model class treats the records or the rows from its database table as objects. And even though this might seem kind of weird at first, at least it did to me, but once you start using it, I think you'll pretty quickly be won over, and you'll see how useful it is and how much more enjoyable it makes developing. And also, like I was saying, that this is one of the things that makes Ruby on Rails accessible to beginners. So as a result of treating database rows basically as objects, you can create and retrieve records like objects, which makes things a lot easier to work with in terms of syntax and so forth. And once active record objects are created, you can call methods on them like you can with any object within Ruby. And when an object is created, all the information from its row in the database will become accessible as object attributes. And a really cool feature of Active Records, and one of the things that makes it so powerful, is that it allows you to define relationships between tables in your database as relationships between objects. So if, for instance, you wanted to list all the members of a group inside of your application, you just need to do group.members. It's just a really simple piece of code there. Whereas if you were to write the SQL query for this, you'd have to do a join, and doing this type of query is the kind of thing that can scare away beginners, but you don't need to deal with that necessarily as a result of being able to abstract it out like this within Active Record. Just a few other features of Active Record I want to bring up. It allows you to define validations and callbacks for when records are created or updated. So for instance, if you have a user sign-up form in your application and you want to make sure that the user is picking a username that is unique, there would be a validation for that. There would also be validations for things like making sure they filled out all of the required forms, or the username is enough characters. And just about any validation that you would need on a day-to-day basis is in there. And it also makes it easy to define your own validations or callbacks. And this is another really cool feature of working with Rails. Also, Migrations, these provides a reversible list of changes to the database. As I was saying earlier, instead of making changes directly to the database with Rails, you use migration files. And this is really useful because it provides you a complete list of all the changes that have been made. So if you or another developer makes some changes that kind of screw things up, and you want to see what happened, all you have to do is go back and look at the files that are there. And if you need to revert the database to a previous state, all you have to do is run a simple command. And this can really save you a lot of headaches as a developer, and make relationships between your developers a lot more harmonious, because you won't be stepping on each other's toes all the time by making changes to the database. So I'm just going to go over some things with controllers and routing. It's not necessarily the sexiest part of the application, but it's very important. So one really important concept to remember is that each method on each controller class handles a specific request, in this case HTTP request, as defined in your routes file. So if your controller method doesn't have something pointing to it in the routes file, Rails isn't going to know it's there, basically. And inside of your routes file, you can use the resources keyword, and this will automatically define all the routes that you need for a basic CRUD interface. CRUD stands for, in this case, stands for create, read, update, delete. And when you're building web applications, a lot of what you're doing is just building CRUD interfaces. So the fact that they define all these for you saves you a lot of time, and allows you to keep your controllers a lot more consistent with one another. And another cool feature is that all of the parameters from a request in Ruby on Rails are available in your controller using the params hash, and this is regardless of what request type it is. It could be a GET request or a POST request, and you can access all of those parameters inside your controller really easily. And this is one of the things that makes it really easy to process forms inside of Rails, and it would also make it easy to build a REST API or something like that if that's what you're trying to do. And out of the box automatically, your controller will respond to requests for HTML files, but if you wanted to adjust your controller and have it serve up JSON objects or XML based on what request format it gets, all you have to do is use the respond to method. And this allows you to make Rails not just a framework for building applications. You can also use it for building APIs, or for building a backend for a JavaScript front end, like as I was mentioning earlier. And one important thing to note and to remember when you're working with controllers is you need to load any, if you want any variables to be available outside of your controller, whether it's in a view or as part of a JSON object, you're going to need to load it into an instance variable. And in Ruby, that basically just means putting the @ symbol in front of your variable. And if you put it inside of that instance variable, then you can access it inside of your view or as part of your JSON object that you're serving. So I'm just going to go over a few quick things with views. And one important idea to remember is that each controller method will have its own view folder inside of your application. And so when that controller method gets loaded, it'll attempt to load out whatever contents are in that view folder. And the default templating system that comes with Rails is called eRuby, or embedded Ruby. And basically this just works by allowing you to put Ruby code directly into your HTML inside the tags like I described, and any output from that Ruby code will be directly outputted into your HTML. This is pretty similar to how PHP works by default. And view helpers are really something that's really helpful, pun intended, inside of views. Basically, this allows you to move code outside of your view files that wouldn't necessarily go inside of a model or a controller. It gives you a convenient place to put it, and Rails does come with a lot of helpers that are predefined, such as the link to helper, which creates hyperlinks for you. And you can also create your own pretty easily, so that's another useful feature as well. That brings up my next point, and that is you should try to keep the amount of Ruby code in your views to a minimum, as the entire Ruby language being available inside of your views is both a feature and a drawback. It's a drawback in the sense that theoretically you could write most of the application directly inside of your views, but that's a really bad idea. So if you are able to take it out of your view, then you should. And so that's, if you learn nothing else from this presentation, that's one thing that I hope that sticks. This has basically just been a crash course on Ruby on Rails. It's by no means an exhaustive introduction. So I'm just going to leave you with a few pieces of advice on how to handle things as you venture out into the Rails world and start building your applications. A lot of people like to dive right into Rails and start working with it, and that's great and all, but I strongly recommend that you learn about Ruby as a language and some of its unique features. It's a lot different from a lot of other languages out there, and that's good, but it can also make it kind of hard to get used to if you haven't worked with it before. And I think if you learn about Ruby, then you're going to have a lot more fun developing with Rails than if you don't learn a whole lot about it going in. And even though Rails does abstract a lot of database stuff out for you, it's still useful to have some knowledge about what's going on with the database. You don't need to be an expert necessarily, but the more database knowledge you have, the more effective you will be as a developer. And when you're working with Ruby and Ruby on Rails, you're likely to encounter some people with some rather strong opinions. And it's a good idea to listen to differing points of view. But ultimately, you should try to figure out what works for you. What works for somebody else isn't necessarily what's best for you. So you should try to chart your own course. So I just have a few quick recommendations on some resources you can look at to learn more. Rails Guides is the first one up there. That's a website that has a lot of tutorials on how to work with Ruby on Rails. And I've keep going back there again and again, even after I've been working with Rails for a while, and it does a really good job of explaining things in plain English. Railscasts.com, that's a website of videos on Rails, and it's not entirely free. Some of them you have to pay to access, and unfortunately it hasn't been updated in a while, but it still has a lot of really useful information, and it can help you accomplish specific things within Rails, even if you're not a Rails pro, so I highly recommend that. Rails for Zombies, that's an interactive tutorial at codeschool.com. That one's really helpful, especially for beginners. And also Code School has some other stuff, cool stuff that I recommend you check out. The Ruby on Rails tutorial is a book written by Michael Hartle. You can access it online for free, and you can also purchase a print copy or an ebook. And also just ask for help from people around you, or go online and ask for help. One of the really cool things about Ruby and Ruby on Rails is the community aspect and the number of people who are really enthusiastic about helping beginners. So don't be afraid to ask for help. I mean, there's plenty of nice people out there. So that wraps up the presentation. I thank all of you for watching, and I hope you got something out of it. Goodbye.